welcome back to my channel. So I'm here today chatting with James Mcdonald. I'm lucky to have him as a special guest on today. He's someone in the carnivore community that has had a number of health issues. And he's been using this sort of diet to really conquer and tackle them. So he's a qualified PT. He's been looking into it since, I believe, the middle of secondary school. So, you know, he's paid his due diligence and has a good understanding of nutrition. So I just thought I'd bring him on today just to speak about that and his experiences. So yeah, is there
Yeah.
anything you want to say, James?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for introducing me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I'm looking forward to seeing how this progresses. Um, as far as my background, like you said, qualified PT. I was qualified last year, so I started working in a gym, fitness first here in the UK. And really, I've been into health and fitness for most of my life, to be honest. But made a lot of mistakes along the way and learned from them. I've fallen into different fads before, not too much. I've always been a little bit of a contrarian. So, I didn't ever fully go for the whole plant-based, vegan, vegetarian thing, but I did go through my own phase of it and suffered certain consequences. And apart from that, I think I found over the past couple of years, especially looking into nutrition, that a lot of what I originally thought and what people are led to believe is it's almost the complete opposite of the truth. And it sounds a bit odd to say, but I'm helping myself and even family members now through a more ancestral way of life. So especially when it comes to diet, cutting out a lot of toxins, plant toxins, especially, and focusing more on what we actually know is to be true for what humans are designed to eat. And seeing a lot of improvements from that, including in my physical fitness. Mentioned as well about my health issues. I think some of them were born out of chronic stress in the past, just kind of growing up, but definitely exacerbated from diet, or through diet rather. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that even the foods that some people might be able to handle quite well over a lifetime can be quite detrimental to others, especially when it comes to plant food. So it'll be exciting to dive into that.
Yeah, you made a good point there about the variability between individuals and how well they can tolerate different foods. So this seems to be a topic that I'm coming up with myself and speaking to loads of different people. It all seems to be the people that follow this sort of diet do tend to have more severe health issues. So it might be a skin disease, diabetes, major sort of ailments they're trying to, mitigate, reduce, prevent, cure, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about your health and like chronic stress when you're younger, sort of thing. So do you want to outline some of the key features of your current health and what you're doing in terms of diet to alleviate those?
Yeah. So I suppose one of the things that little always suffer with. Sorry. I'll sort of preface this by saying I'm 21 years old, so I've got a lot to learn still. I'm not the most experienced person out there, but I can say of the 21 years that I've been alive, nearly 22, about 20 of them I've had gut issues, and that's not a nice thing to admit, but it is something that I think a lot of people do face nowadays. And even eating like a healthy diet, for example, which it was very healthy. I used to follow the Western A press diet very closely. I would ferment grains, everything like that, make sourdough bread. I was eating a lot of salad, for example, and I didn't skimp on the animal protein. I did eat a fair amount of things like sardines, red meat, pork, kind of the whole variety really, and came to fall in love with organ meats as well a few years back. But none of that even really touched, I suppose, my gut health, like cutting out the plants and going for a more carnivorous lifestyle really has over the past few months. So that's one thing which is definitely improved. At the moment, what I eat on a day-to-day basis, typically it'll be red meat twice or once or twice a day, but definitely every day. Usually steak, but I do a fair amount of lamb heart as well. organ meats here and there, not too often. Kidneys, I'm all right with maybe every couple of weeks or so. Liver once every 1 or 2 months. Apart from that, I enjoy quite a lot of pork. I balance that out with fatty fish, so getting both the omega 3s and omega 6s in the diet. So fatty fish would be things like sardines, like I said earlier, or mackerel, and I eat a lot of eggs as well, and raw dairy where I can get it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the other thing as well. So you mentioned chronic stress. That obviously is very closely linked to your gut health. As we know, over 90% of our what do you call them? The neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, and I found that going into this kind of diet has really given me a sense of mental clarity which I've never experienced before. Um, and it's quite profound, really. Even after the first month, I was thinking clearer, coping with negative situations in a much more calm and level-headed way, and getting less brain fog. It's the
Mm.
kind of every area of mental health has improved with this way of life, and people think it's crazy maybe to say that cutting out spinach and cocoa and all the oxalates, for example, has done that, but it's very true. It's quite powerful.
Yeah, you covered really broad a lot of points there. Um, I'll just try and dissect a little bit of what you said and try and get different points across. But basically, you you've got a very humble attitude for someone of 21 years old. I mean, I'm 27, and I'm wishing that I knew what you knew at your age. Um, I did have an understanding of nutrition, but if I was in the same shoes as you sort of thing, go back 6, 7 years sort of thing, I'd be able to have much better. I'll be further along my own health journey. So that's interesting. Yeah, I'm astonished by your knowledge. Like, it's beyond a lot of people much older than us. So good job on that. Um,
Yeah.
you touched on like gut health as well. So I had a question for you in regards to that. So in your experience, what would you say is the biggest driver in improving your gut health? So there's I guess, two main things that you can come across. So one is that you've omitted the plant-based foods. The other one is you've reduced by default your sugar intake. Would you say it's the
Hmm.
omittance of plant-based foods or the lowering of your glucose, your sugar intake? What do you say was the biggest driver in affecting your gut health?
Of those two, um, hard to say. I think it's the latter, really. Or sorry, the prior. No, it was cutting out the plant food. So
Mm,
going in, I did a keto diet for a short amount of time before carnivore. Maybe about a month and a half, and then I was like, actually, I'm gonna go full carnivore now. So it was a bit of a transition, but it was very quick compared to what some people's experience has been. And I found that even on a keto diet, my gut health did improve. But I suppose in terms of orders of magnitude, it was greater. The benefit that I received was greater going from keto to carnivore than it was from a whole food, fairly high carb diet to keto. Um, I think when I was doing keto, I was still eating. I was actually eating low oxalate at that time because I did experience some oxalate issues, which were very scary. Maybe we can get into them a little bit later. But even with all the fiber and I suppose some other anti-nutrients that were still present, I was still experiencing certain issues, and going full carnivore has had a greater effect. So probably cutting out the toxins and the fiber, and I suppose given my gut permeability and everything a real chance to heal,
mm,
has had a bigger impact than just controlling the blood sugar levels. One thing I should say as well is that even when I used to eat fairly high carb, um, at least for a couple of years, it was rather low carb compared to most people. So I would do uh, maybe 1 or 2 high carb meals a day. A lot of people do 3, just because I was training maybe about 5 days a week in the gym, and most people would say
mm.
that what I was eating was low carb. Although we know really it wasn't. I was probably going about anywhere from 30. Oh, well, no, it depends on the day, but anywhere between 30 to 90 grams of carbs a day, depending on the training intensity and my recovery. Um, but still that sounds low carb, but it really I don't think it was.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to touch on here is James is a lighter individual. I believe you're around, is it 6 foot?
Uh, 5'10". So
At 5'10", yeah. So 5'10", I'm being a bit generous there. I was generous with my girlfriend as well the other day. Yeah, so you're, I believe, around about 45, 47 kilograms. So
yeah,
you're
yeah.
a very
So
light
yeah,
frame.
my last weigh-in would have been. I'm actually on, on vacation at the moment, so
Mm.
this is a caravan I'm in. But the last weigh-in was on the Friday morning that I left, and that was 45.5. So yeah, very very light. It's a bit hard to believe for some people, but I used to be even lighter than this, and that goes back to a different kind of health issue that I did have, and I'm slowly overcoming as well.
Yeah, so it seems like you're doing all the right things, you're hitting all the right spots, sort of thing. You're knocking on the right doors. You're trying to, you have a training program. It's specific to you.
Yeah,
You're trying to elevate your results by using a diet that's gonna, eliminate or reduce the impact of eating a bit more food to bulk up, in theory.
yeah,
So yeah, as I said, you're 45 kilograms roughly. Um, so that would probably be why the 30 to 90 grams carbohydrates at the time that you're taking in will be considered a lot for you, because that is probably a lot for you. I mean,
that's
recommendations are very
exactly right.
that yeah. I mean, for the average population right now, what they're eating, 250 grams of carbs a day, something like that. I can't remember
Yeah,
the
yeah,
exact
about
data.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, so you think, well, they're eating that much. That's a lot of packets of Uncle Ben's rice. If you look at it that way, and
yeah,
sugar, and there's a lot of hidden sugars in the foods we eat, particularly ready meals. I mean,
unbelievable.
I was in a grocery store the other day, and I looked at just out of interest, I looked at a ready meal, which was a chicken curry, and you'd
Mm,
have thought, quite high protein. It's got the chicken in there, carbs moderate, and quite a high fat level. No, there's way more carbs and protein. And I was like, there's no rice in this meal, so
yeah,
what? It's all hidden
yeah,
in the sauce, and people don't
yeah,
always equate. They think a protein-rich meal is like a curry or something, but the reality is you're eating probably more sugar than anything. So that's a good
yeah.
point as well.
And
Mm,
I think that's definitely a topic worth touching on. So I started to notice, like I said, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago now, when I really started getting into nutrition, that so much has kind of hidden harmful ingredients in. We can touch on seed oils maybe, but you mentioned sugars, and I still live with family members, and I have friends, for example, who, despite my best efforts, aren't going to take the kind of lifestyle to, I suppose, cut out all the processed foods. I've convinced some family members who have had profound benefits on their health from doing so. So I'm hoping that will encourage others. Um, but what that means is that I still see a fair amount of packaged foods and that I suppose just laying about, and I pick them up out of curiosity and read them all the time. Even when I'm shopping, if I see something, I pick it up and just kind of see what's in there. And sugar is it's almost ubiquitous. It's so hard to escape unless you're really going to go back to just the plain ingredients and cut out processed foods as a whole. You can get, for example, zero sugar, Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whatever else you're going to go for. But more and more data is coming out suggesting that even those artificial sweeteners could be detrimental long term. So um, yeah, including on insulin, um, it's an important point. Yeah, definitely. And like you
yeah,
said about my relative body mass, so it's a good point. I'm very light, especially for my height as well. And what that means is that even with a relative, I suppose, macronutrient percentage, which would be considered low carb, it was still high carb for me. And that's where there's a missing link sometimes in the entire nutrition field. Some people like yourself understand, to the T that everything needs to be really individualized, and
mm,
you can't really escape that fact. But others fall into fad diets or just follow, one piece of advice that worked for someone else and think it's going to work for them, and it's not always the case. So you have to be careful, definitely.
yeah. So let's backtrack a bit about seed oils. So we both
Yeah.
got extensive knowledge on that sort of topic. So perhaps you'd like to inform the audience about that. So what seed oils are there? What are the worst ones, maybe? What do they do in your body? What can you highlight about
Yeah. So this is one of the first things that I really learned about, which kind of take me onto the, I suppose, more ancestral way of life. I read a book by Dr. Kate Shanahan, absolutely incredible nutritionist. I am a big fan. She wrote a book called Deep Nutrition,
Mm,
and that's something that got a lot of people into the paleo space and the keto space as well. Um, and she talks about the hateful eight. So all these different seed oils. I can't remember exactly what each eight are, but it's corn, soy. They're the popular ones in America, but then you also got
mm.
canola, sunflower,
Rapeseed, yeah.
rapeseed, yep, uh, grapeseed as well. So anything which comes from a seed being a seed as we know 'em, like sunflower seeds, right, or nuts, or any sort of grain, all of those, or beans, all of those oils, those plant parts are considered seeds, and basically they're very, very high in what we call polyunsaturated fatty acids. Um, by themselves, we do need a certain amount of polyunsaturated fats in the diet, specifically omega 3 and omega 6. They're the essential ones, and we should get a balance of them. But there are two problems with seed oils in particular. So the extraction process is very,
Mm.
very high heat, and often high pressure as well. And oils are stored in, well, a lot of the times in light, in containers where they can receive light from artificial sources or from the sun.
They go rancid, yeah.
What that does, yes, yes, exactly. So the rancidity is because these are polyunsaturated fats. What that unsaturated means is that in the fatty chain, I suppose, links, if you imagine a saturated fat, it's very, very straight. So each one is saturated with a hydrogen atom. Polyunsaturated, they have a lot of basically breaks in this fatty acid chain, if I try and simplify it, and it makes them quite weak. So when they are oxidized, which is what happens when they're heated or exposed to light, they distort and can form a harmful type of fat called a trans fat. And along with that, you will often find aldehydes and other carcinogenic toxins. Now, I say that with a little bit of hesitance because there is some data that still needs to be, I suppose, there still needs to be done. A lot of research still needs to be done to fully clarify a link between seed oils and adverse health effects.
Mm.
But we do have data specifically linking these molecules to adverse health effects. And it's kind of, on an anecdotal basis, it's clear that those who eat the more seed oils experience much worse health outcomes over the long run.
Mm.
That's how it seems to be anyway. So when you eat seed oils, anything like that, it goes into your body, and these trans fats and aldehydes and carcinogens can basically create a free radical cascade, a ton of inflammation. And one of the most scary effects is that your body stores fats. Every cell in your body, as you'll know, has a membrane, and that membrane is basically made of cholesterol and fat. And when you have unsaturated fats, because like I said, they're unstable, that makes your cells themselves quite unstable in a way. They're more prone to damage and oxidation from inflammation and other toxins, or I suppose issues that you might have in your bloodstream circulating throughout your body.
Mm.
When that happens, your liver in turn will often produce more cholesterol to deliver protective nutrients to those cells. And that's where the link between certain types of fat storage and rising cholesterol levels is in the first place. For example, if you're eating a more ancestral diet, your more monounsaturated fats, saturated fats, that will be, I suppose, forming your cell membranes. They'll be much more stable and protected against any sort of damage, basically. And what it means is that they don't require the same amount of nutrients to be delivered through the bloodstream. Your cholesterol levels aren't going to be chronically elevated. And even though that might not be an issue, it is an issue when you have inflammation in the first place. So it's kind of a double whammy. So
Mm.
they're causing inflammation, causing the cholesterol to go up, and then the cholesterol gets oxidized at the same time. Often you've got oxidated fats from the seed oils themselves, and that's what causes things like heart disease and other metabolic disorders. So you know, I'm sort of just scratching the surface here, but that's some
Yeah.
of the main, or those are some of the main issues. Yeah,
Yeah, you've simplified it really well, and it should be quite clear for people to understand, I hope. So,
hopefully.
I mean, you mentioned there's sort of confounding studies as a bit, it's a bit iffy, like the science is a bit, Um,
Hmm.
what I'd say to someone with that mind is, polyunsaturated fats are good, linoleic acid's good, sort of thing, is I'd look at a healthy animal. So you're thinking, well, how often do you see diseased cows in the UK? It's quite rare. You don't see a lot of diseased
Hmm.
animals, when they're kept in a sustainable way, when they're sort of they're bred correctly, they've got suitable shelter, feed, everything's all proper. What you'll see of them is the beef they produce, the saturated fat levels, mono, poly, it's almost matching what we should be taking in as a diet. Do you think
Yeah,
they're healthy animals, so
absolutely.
they've got they don't have a lot of high amounts of polyunsaturated fat in their body. It's not going to give them an issue. Ultimately, they're red meat, we're red meat, so you kind of think there could be some sort of correlation here. Again, it's just my idea around it all, but some people might disagree. That's fine.
No, I think that's absolutely a very valid point, and one that needs to be discussed more. To be honest, one of the things, just touching on what I said about the data. The reason I mentioned that is because, for example, with the kind of like we've seen countless, by this point, hundreds of thousands, I think even millions of people taking it and
Mm,
being life-changing effect. Some instantly, some it takes a little bit longer because of a healing process, right? But it's been almost unanimously positive, um, and it has to be individualized. When we see seed oil data, you have to remember that studies are funded for a purpose, right? So there's not going to be too much data on seed oils because it's not in the best interest of any of the major study funders to
mm.
show anything that is gonna, I suppose,
Briscoe, Monsanto.
yeah,
Mm,
exactly, and anything that's gonna risk, I suppose, giving any sort of negative impression that seed oils are bad for you, because that's what they sell. That's what they put in their food. It's the same thing with carbohydrates, right? Famous studies funded in the past by Coca-Cola to show that sugar isn't bad in the diet. Um, and look where that got us when that got into nutritional, mainstream advice, saying that we should eat, you know, 6, 7 times a day and eat a high carb snack about 4 of those times. It's just ridiculous.
mm,
Diabetes, everything is skyrocketing. So Alzheimer's, all types of metabolic diseases, right, and even cancer, which we now know is more of a metabolic disease, and we've come to understand that a lot more. Um, so that's why I say that, because you get some doctors in the space, and I'm talking about doctors as in actual medical doctors, the ones that have been a bit indoctrinated, and they're kind of stuck in a way saying, no, unsaturated fats are good for you. That's exactly what you need to cook with. And they're going to throw kind of everything and the kitchen sink at people to say about what data is there to support
mm.
unsaturated fats as opposed to what isn't. The only data which really supports that is some sort of mice studies. They're not designed to eat a high fat, high protein kind of diet like humans are. So that's a bit of a uh, a null point.
Yeah.
And we also have mechanistic studies, and yeah, I think we've seen too many times in the nutritional science space, especially that when you have mechanistic studies looking at specific parts of the metabolic machine, the
Mm,
whole human body, a certain way that a certain cell reacts to a specific type of fatty acid. Um, it doesn't play out in the long run because there are too many
yeah.
interactions, right? And Bart K, for example, an absolutely amazing person in the space who you've spoken to. He makes the
Interviewing
analogy
him
of
on
it's like,
Friday.
oh, good, I cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Everyone watching, I'm just saying, you've got to go tune into that. I'm telling you, it's going to be good.
Mm,
Bart K, though, he uses the analogy of it's like looking into an engine, basically, like a car engine, putting out one cog saying, oh, this cog does this. and therefore this is what the whole engine does and how everything is. It doesn't work, you know.
Mm.
So I've gone on a tangent. I do this quite a lot. If I do ramble, to stop me. But
That's fine,
seed
carry on.
oils, yeah, seed oils do basically have negative effects in what we've seen from, I suppose, more of the anecdotal studies. And I think as more data does come out, looking at the long-term health implications of consuming these on a chronic basis, especially, we're going to see a lot of problems. And the one person, again, who I think is most prominent in the space and most knowledgeable about this would be Dr. Kate Shanahan. She's done research on the metabolic effects of it and even how long it takes to rid your body of seed oils once they're already kind of in your system. For example, if you've been going to supermarkets buying sunflower oil and cooking your eggs or whatever in that for however many years of your life, it can take about anywhere from 5 to 7 years for most people to fully rid themselves of these toxins, and it can be bad if you do it too quickly as well. So if you're losing weight, because that's how you're going to lose fat, right? Stored in your cells, you're going to have to lose it by weight. So if you're losing that fat, it's being released back into your system and can be quite harmful. It can be quite inflammatory. So some people see symptom flare-ups of chronic health diseases or other issues emerge when they lose weight too rapidly if they've been eating these seed oils, because they're basically flooding back into the system and often being oxidized, for example. And we'll kind of know where that leads. So there has to be nuance when you talk about the data which does and does not exist. And a lot of the time you have to just go by, or at least not just go by, but you have to go primarily by the anecdotes and what you find to be individually beneficial. And from an ancestral viewpoint, we know we didn't eat this stuff. It wouldn't make sense if we were designed to fully handle and cope with them. They're unlike anything that we've ever been able to consume, really. Seed oils were made in the Industrial Revolution as an industrial lubricant, and then later on turned into food and sold at a mass profit because it was cheap and easy to produce, which is quite tragic, really. But that's one of the problems we face in society in general. It's that kind of greed. It's the money over welfare problem that we see.
And about another thing as well, you mentioned, it's created, through the agricultural revolution. It's cheap to put in stuff. But I came across something interesting recently. So I went to my local butcher's and I bought, it's roughly 1.4 kilograms of beef fat. It's just a bag of fat, from the animal, just cut off.
Lovely.
What we did basically is we rendered it in the slow cooker over the course of about maybe 6-7 hours or something. And we got something like 600-700 grams of beef tallow. It comes out like liquid gold. It looks a bit like olive oil, but obviously it's not. It's a saturated fat sort of thing. And we paid for that amount 50p. And those bottles of 50 pence for that bag of beef fat. And you got to think, well, if you're buying a bottle of vegetable oil, especially if you're buying extra virgin olive oil, Filippo Berio, whatever it is, glass bottle, 8-10 quid a bottle sort of thing, like a litre. It's 20 times more expensive nearly, or 15-20 times more expensive for the same quantity of something that isn't going to be as beneficial for your body. So you got to look at it that way as well. So I was just talking about extra virgin olive oil and beef tallow, things like that, beef dripping, whatever you want to call it. So what are your thoughts towards that? Like, what are the pros and cons of it, if any? What do you think?
It's a good way to word it. I think there are pros and cons. For most people, I think the thing is with, for example, extra virgin olive oil in particular, seed oils we've sort of touched on, so they're bad. Olive oil is more monounsaturated fat. It's much more stable. And if you get extra virgin, you kind of have an added benefit that they do have antioxidants naturally present in the olives. What the antioxidants do is stop oxidation, basically, of the oil. So when it's stored in light or cooked with, it has less of a chance of going rancid, right? So that's why most of the time when you buy olive oil, you'll find it in dark containers because it keeps it from going rancid in the first place. If only they're on the same thing with seed oils, right, and cold press them, maybe it might be a little bit better. But some of the pros might be that there are studies showing that certain types of monounsaturated fats in olive oil and anti-inflammatory compounds such as oleostanthal I think it's called, or oleocanthal, I probably said it wrong. They have been shown in certain studies, once again, that there are anecdotal ones, so it's been used in for example, certain patients with chronic diseases, but I think mostly at the moment we have, animal studies and mechanistic ones showing that extra virgin olive oil or its compounds can have profound anti-inflammatory effect in certain contexts. So there's a place and a time for it, I think, but you don't want to be basing your diet on it. So you look at what people call a Mediterranean diet. That's not really a thing, but
A loosely
if you do
defined
look at the
idea of a diet, isn't it?
yeah. That's a topic for another day. We could talk about it for hours. But yeah, you'd say basically the longevity hotspots that we do know of, such as Sardinia in Italy and Icaria in Greece, the island, actually both of them are islands. They're actually the people that are often living in the mountainous regions, eating more animal fat. They don't really have olives as such. A little bit of extra virgin olive oil here and there, and I think it can be beneficial. Probably some sort of maybe hormesis effect there. But you have to remember that these people are also living an ancestral lifestyle. They're outside, they're moving, they're healthy, they're fit. They're eating in a way which keeps them very, very robust. And there's also a genetic component to it, and these people can handle these olive oils very well if there is any sort of negative effect, and I think there certainly could be. I know Paul Saladino is a bit of a name that is thrown about in the space for controversial reasons, but he does make a good point on certain issues, I suppose, or points of conjunction with antioxidants in plants, showing that actually when you're consuming them in a large amount, your body's overall antioxidant capacity does decrease, and it could potentially extrapolate it be negative on your body. So we know that when we eat an ancestral diet and when we do things like get out in the sun and have certain amounts of environmental stresses that create hormesis, like going in the cold, going in the heat, for example, we upregulate our own antioxidants like glutathione, for example. Obviously the master antioxidant, but there are others, and we get some from animal foods as it is, and oftentimes they're more potent than their plant counterparts. So that's kind of why I stand on extra virgin olive oil. Probably okay for most people in small amounts, or moderate amounts even. But you don't want to base that as your main dietary fat intake. And obviously, the more pure and fresh you can get it, the better. Part of the reason might be for even deuterium purposes. If it's stored over a very long period of time, like some of them can be, there's an issue there. That's probably a topic which is worth mentioning in the future, maybe a part 2, or people can look into that. It's worth looking into. But animal fats, all in all, are much more, I suppose, appropriate for our biology, so it seems.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. You've really went into detail there. You've covered some really good points. If anyone has any questions about that that's watching this video, just comment below and we can always do another video in regards to that particular topic.
Yeah.
So we're talking about fat, it's our main source of energy. Our body contains something like 100,000 calories of fat in our body. Glycogen, you're talking about a few thousand calories. It's very obvious here what we can sustain. So what's your fuel source? So you're doing your workouts now, you're doing, maybe outline your workouts a little bit, but how does your diet work around your training?
Yeah, so that's a great tangent to go on. At the moment, I'm doing about a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of grams, so protein to fat. So if we were to put it into macros or calories, so to speak, it would be about 30% protein, give or take, and 70% fat. And that's what fuels me my workouts now. In the past, in fact, for most of my life, I've been very high carb. I used to eat, before I got into ancestral lifestyle, bread, pasta, crisps, etc. All the carbs, basically. Cereals, toast, whatever else you can probably think of, rice, and that used to be my fuel. Then, like I said, I went on to what some people would consider a low carb diet, just as I started to learn more about an ancestral, more appropriate way of eating. It was still fairly high carb though. For me, it was 1 or 2 high carbs a day, and that was just to replenish my glycogen in between workouts. Most of the time, because I'm quite small, I've been trying to gain mass, and therefore, I saw the value in it. Doing explosive lifts, and using quite glycolytic energy pathways, for example, as opposed to long distance running where you can primarily burn fat and it's more of a slower burn fuel, right? You want something fast and quick enough for the carbs to provide. However, now that I've switched into a state of ketosis and gone into a carnivore diet after that, I've actually upped my performance in the gym, and I didn't expect that. So I went into ketosis out of kind of health concerns and learning more about what we're actually supposed to eat as a human species, just looking at anthropological data, for example. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to focus on health, this is what I need to do. So I did. My performance dropped. I experienced a little bit of a keto flu as I adjusted my electrolytes, for example, in the first couple of weeks. And then after that, maybe another couple of weeks was slow progress of getting back up to performance capacity. At the moment, I'm performing better than I was in the past. I'm consistently going up in my lift now, almost every single session, at a faster rate than I've been able to in a long time. And I'm noticing as well, even though I don't do long, steady state cardio at the moment, it's not in my goals. When I do a little bit here and there, my energy levels are kind of so much more boundless. In the past, even when I was eating carbs and training to do long distance running, I could find myself getting quite gassy or out of breath quite easily. And now when I run just out of leisurely purposes, or if I do some sort of a quite I suppose cardio demanding weightlifting like supersets or circuit or something like that, I'm managing it so much more better. So there's definitely a benefit to running on fat when it comes to your, I suppose, endurance in athletic performance. And the point about lifting and explosive lifts, everyone thinks that you need carbs for that, but it is beyond doubt now. It is proven that we do, as we go into a state of ketosis and adapt our metabolism very well to produce our own glycogen, and it's context specific, right? It's energy demand driven. So if you eat enough protein, especially in your diet, which you need if you're training, you don't want to go like low protein if you're performing at a high capacity, right? That's kind of conventional wisdom anyway. But if you're getting enough in on a high fat diet, your body will learn and adapt and more efficiently turn that protein into glucose. So you can produce your own fuel. And overall, I think going into a low carb lifestyle and way of life and way of eating, because of the health benefits you're going to see in the long run, when you look at it over a longer period of time, where you're going from that adaptation, adaptation, so you're not performing at your best, then you're kind of picking it up. But along all of this time from you're improving your health, right? I think all of that leads to a greater level of performance in the gym overall. So that's sort of where I stand on it at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's you really touched on a good point there about having enough protein, and that seems to be where some people are having issues. So they're elevating fat too much, but at the cost of reducing their protein. And I'm talking like low levels. So I've got a video. It'll probably be up before this particular upload, but it'll be basically around the carnivore diet and the protein and fat ratios. I go through it quite explicitly, quite a lot of detail, and sort of explain why each variation of it will be beneficial to people. People like James, myself, we are hitting closer, towards equal sort of protein fat. My ratios, for example, are around 60% fat, and 40% protein. That's an estimate. I ballpark it generally speaking, but it is within that sort of range. James is a bit higher. He's around 70% fat. It depends on obviously your musculature as well and what your goals are. I mean, we're two different people. Our training methodologies are, although similar, we train hard sort of thing. They're a bit different. Um, and his goals are a bit different to mine as well. So he's working against his hormones and current health issues, which, although I have some, mine are different to his. So he's going to benefit from having more fats, to really heal his body to the extent that he wants. So yeah, I'd say just don't, people that are watching this, don't sort of transition to this diet. Give it a week or two and think, oh, I'm training in the gym. I've lost 5 kilos, but I feel flat. I don't look good. I'm not pumped anymore. Give it a bit longer. I mean, Robert Sykes, he's the keto savage on YouTube. He says it can take a year or much longer sort of thing to really get into a proper fat adapted state. And from that point on, when you think, oh, does that mean I can only ever consume fat? What happens at Christmas or special occasions when you might have something different. You're in a in a family gathering sort of thing. There's not going to be a steak on the table. There's going to be a ton of potatoes as a pasta and a little bit of meat. So you got to think, okay, is that going to be okay? Is that going to be compatible? And the results are people that do these long-term ketogenic or high-fat approach diets is that they are metabolically flexible and they can ultimately have a few days or a day or even just a meal where they have, a big bowl of pasta, some cheese and whatever they like. And they won't suffer too much consequences for it. It won't be as bad as what they think. And ultimately their body will return back to a state of ketogenesis a lot quicker than the average person. So this diet is it, it it's not exactly as it doesn't admit everything in that sort of way. You can have some allowances. And myself and my girlfriend, I'm an abstainer from some foods, so it's better I just don't eat it. But what we will do every now and then to keep on track is just say, oh, on this date or this date, might be once a month even, might say, we're gonna order a Chinese or have, I don't know, some chips with our meal. So that's, you call them French fries sort of thing in the States. So yeah, we'll do those and we quite enjoy that. And that'll be one meal. But you've got to think, I'm consuming 5 meals 7 times a week. And every month you think that's one meal out of 100 and God knows how many. So it's not going to do too much damage. And ultimately it's going to make things more manageable for me to be able to go to different events, gathering occasions, and actually be able to cope in that regard. Some people have to be a bit more strict. They have to stay on the diet all the time, otherwise they fall off. They feel really terrible. And examples of that, Jordan and Michaela Peterson. I'm sure there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people around in the world that have that same issue. So yeah, the diet does have to evolve around you and your goals. So yeah, do you have anything to add to that or?
No. I think you just brought up some really really good points. One of which is the fact that some people might look at this and think that, oh, how can you not eat carbs? How can you not have cake or a cupcake or whatever? And that's not living. But
Hmm.
there are a couple of things to say about it. One is that, I mean, really, up until very very recently in human history, none of us did that, and we all lived. Um, and many of us had very very good lives for it. And many of us are doing so nowadays. So at the end of the day, food is, just by its very inherent nature and our evolutionary processes, it's such an emotional topic. We're designed to crave it. We're designed to want it, and we associate it with social situations. We create memories from it. So yeah, on an emotional level, it's hard for some people to imagine not eating carbs. Um, but in, I suppose, an ancestral context, again, you have to remember that there was seasonality outside of the glacial periods where we probably didn't really get fruit or anything for many years. There were periods and hotter times where, such as now, we do get fruit. We do get seasonal tubers and that if we prepare them properly, such as pickling and fermenting and maybe grounding down, we can consume them, and we're not going to face severe consequences from it. So it's not like you transition to this and that's it, that's your life done. You
Mm.
can't eat carbs. You know, make an exception here and there. It's totally fine, especially if you can do it naturally. I know a lot of carnivores in the space now, they eat fruit. That's you don't want to be doing that every day. I think there are a lot of reasons that you don't want to be. It's just not necessarily appropriate, but beyond that, there are metabolic reasons as well. But seasonally, why not? And some studies might suggest that there could be a certain benefit to leaving, or some theories rather, to leaving a state of ketosis. You don't want to be in a state of ketosis all the time. That can be very detrimental on your metabolic health. And that's where, again, high protein also comes in, because, like I said, gluconeogenesis, you eat protein to a sufficient quantity and create a demand, and it will produce an insulin and blood sugar spike, which is totally appropriate for your biology. There was something else you said about, for example, maybe even once a month, for example, is however many meals out of 100 that you're having something that's a bit of a cheat, compared to what most people are doing in the modern day, where probably 3 meals a day are considered cheats. The benefits, or rather the downsides of it, are going to be so minimal comparatively. And like you said, if you're in ketosis, once you're fully adapted, and I know I'm not, like you said, it can take up to a year from Robert Sykes, and I think that's absolutely true. I'm looking at my current state and thinking I've still got a long way to go. But once you're in that state, it's so much easier to get back into it, and you are more metabolically flexible. It's not like you're going to have the same level of blood sugar crash or brain fog or anything like that from eating carbs here and there, as you might on a chronic basis eating carbs. So yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah. So you mentioned that I mentioned the metabolic flexibility thing. This is something that I believe a lot of people misinterpret. So a few years ago, it might have been Mike O'Hearn, if you've heard of him. Yeah, so he's, most people would have heard of him in this fitness, like bodybuilding sort of space. He had a bit of a slip on words, and I actually looked back at it, and he basically, in essence, said, we should aim to consume as many carbohydrates as possible. And that should be our goal, to be able to tolerate them. And I thought, that's the wrong angle here. You're not trying to do that. What you're trying to do is be metabolically flexible, as in, if you do have the occasion where you have to consume a large bolus of carbohydrates, it's not going to absolutely destroy your body. That's been brought up quite a few times on the YouTube space, and I've been watching these videos and thinking that's wrong. I know that's wrong. So what would your commentary be on that, out of interest?
No, that's really interesting. To be honest, I wasn't actually aware that you said that. I have followed some of his other content and advice around training, and about metabolic flexibility. I think there are different ways you can look at it. That term is very broad. On a basic sense, it means that you can switch between a primarily fat burning and primarily carb burning mode quite easily without adverse effect, right? But you have to remember that at all times of the day and like all the time, we are burning both glucose and fatty acids in our bloodstream, in our body, and we're fueling with that.
Different levels. It's
exactly
like
right.
Seesaw.
Yeah. And obviously the higher one goes, the lower the other is going to, relative percentage wise, right? But there's so when you look at the paleo movement, the way that that's grown over time, a prominent figure in the space is Mark Sisson. Mark's daily app website. Yeah. So he's even slowly transitioned now. He spoke a lot about metabolic flexibility in the past.
That's what I'm getting.
Primarily being in ketosis, and then breaking it now and then. And part of that will be the social situation, right? Where overall you have to remember that food and nutrition is not the be all and end all in health. It's one part, and
Mhm.
social connections and mental and emotional well-being are an absolutely profound part. Possibly on par in many ways, not in the same ways, but in many ways. Um, and yeah, being able to eat some carbs here and there is totally indicated in the human diet. The way we've evolved, we should be able to handle it. Um, but we have not at any point in time up until the agricultural revolution, after which chronic health chronic health problems really started to kick in. Our brain size even shrank, and
200
you can even look at
cubic centiliters. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, yeah, and you can even look at skeletons from the agricultural revolution, and you can see that the bones are weaker. The people had a shorter stature. They had more chronic I suppose health problems just from what we can find biologically, even things like lesions in the bones and more fractures and so on. What the point I'm getting at is that you don't want to base your diet on carbs. You want to be based on fat and protein, and now and again eating some carbs is totally fine. That said, you don't want to be, if you're transitioning into ketosis, you have to be strict. You have to get through the adaptation phase. You can't say, oh, I've done it for a week, and I know that people in ketosis can eat some carbs here and there, so I'm going to have once a week a big bowl of rice and some chicken with it. No, you're going to throw yourself off. You have to get through the adaptation first, and get yourself into a state where your body it feels safe and it knows what it's doing on a higher fat I suppose fuel system, right? Metabolic pathways.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a place and time for it. I don't think it's right to say that you want to be aiming to consume as many carbs as possible, because if that's the case, then everybody should be trying to build as much muscle mass as possible and just packing it on all the time, even to the point where it's contraindicated for your health, long term anyway. And consuming, 60% carbs in a diet all the time. That's there are a lot of health problems with that can come. It's not sustainable. First of all, at one point you're going to have to start training less, and the intensity of your lifestyle is going to drop, and those carbs are going to have a more detrimental effect on your metabolic health. So things like diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, even Parkinson's, now they call them type 4 diabetes. The risk for that is going to go up massively. Rheumatoid arthritis, another thing very, very closely linked to excessive blood glucose levels, and the kind of inflammation which is inherently present with that. All of those things are, you're setting yourself up for those in the long run if you're doing that, really. I think if you're looking at optimal health and longevity, basing yourself on an ancestral lifestyle is, it sounds so common sense. It's a no-brainer. When you feed animals and dogs, pets, for example, domesticated
Mm.
cats and dogs, they get all the same chronic diseases that we do now. Cancer, arthritis, diabetes, obesity, everything like that.
Mm.
You look in the wild, you don't find any of that. And what's the change? I mean, they're carnivores, aren't they? But the change is that we're feeding them kibble. We're feeding
Yeah,
them,
that's right.
seed oil laden wheat bran and rice flour, and
Junk,
all
basically.
you have to do is look at the anecdote. Yeah, junk. All you have to do is look at the anecdote and see that it's not good for you. Touching on carbs specifically, they're better seasonally and to drive certain demands and goals, but they're not essential in any way whatsoever. So to say that we should be aiming to consume something that's not essential in a maximum amount, it doesn't make sense.
You've addressed so many good points there. You've given out some really good advice that'll be useful for the viewers, I hope. Before we just wrap this up, are there any closing comments you had about the diet yourself, or anything you wanted to ask me or mention?
I think one thing I would like to say is that you shouldn't fear this. You shouldn't worry about whatever kind of thing is in the back of your mind holding you away from trying something like this. Sometimes you have to force yourself out of your comfort zone, and that's the only way you're going to grow. And I've done it. Think about the social implications sometimes, or you think about oh, well, how am I going to perform in the gym? Or you think, is this actually what we're supposed to eat? Or am I going to face some sort of adverse health effect from, cutting the carbs out? And the best way to do it is just slowly transition over time, not shock your body too much, jump from a standard American diet or any sort of standard Western diet and
Yeah,
suddenly, throw everything off whack, all your electrolytes, all your gut, microbiome, because then you're going to face consequences. And that's not something that we would ever have done in the past, and you shouldn't do it nowadays. So yeah, slow transition in, take your time, don't be hard on yourself. I mentioned mental health earlier. That's so important. So you'll likely find when you cut blood sugar levels to a more stable level over time, going into ketosis. And this is, ketosis was actually, it first became a mainstream diet in the medical field for people with epilepsy, because there were certain benefits to the brain running on ketones and not primarily relying on sugar. And you'll find often, and you can just look it up, thousands of people who have had profound benefits on their mental clarity. So you'll find that. But if you are stressing, take up other lifestyle approaches as well. Don't forget that exercise is important. But maybe even look into meditation, get your sleep right. Everything is a balance. So yeah, I think this would be the main thing I would say. Just especially when it comes to gut health, which a lot of people struggle with.
mm,
Your mood, your mental health is so intricately linked. There's a kind of mutual effects. So if you've got a poor gut health, it's going to affect your brain health. If you've got poor brain health, it will affect your gut health. And the more you work to improve one or the other, both are going to benefit. Basically, is what I'm saying. So yeah,
yeah,
work on stress levels as well. That's important.
that's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the people watching this, this is just one aspect of approaching your health journey, just the diet alone. There's other things as well he's mentioned, the stress levels, your mental health. We could go
Yeah,
into water maybe next time, deuterium. There's so many different
yeah,
elements we need to look
definitely.
at. Um, so if you just want to mention any profiles you have on social media, maybe I'll link them in the show notes as well.
Um, yeah, sure. So I think the main place to find me would be on Instagram, Fitness with Jam. Jam standing for both James, but also my full initials,
Hmm.
believe it or not. And apart from that, I do actually have a nutrition website. I'll be hesitant about telling you to go there because there's some information. It's all based basically on Western A Price Foundation principles,
Hmm.
but I do have, for example, high carb recipes in there, and something else which we should definitely talk about, maybe in a part 2 or 3, or just going forward.
Hmm.
The fact that you don't want to be mixing carbs and fat, at least not very often.
Bring up Randall.
Very, very
Yeah.
important. Yeah, the Randall cycle. Yeah. So if you want to learn about that, first we'll go to Bart K and
Well,
Harry Spanos, I would say. But um, yeah, so I have some recipes on there which do have those sort of combinations. But if you're looking more into an ancestral lifestyle overall and just trying to get an understanding of maybe certain ideas about how you could slowly transition away from a processed food diet towards something like this, then check it out. So the website is called Healthy Ronin. It hasn't been updated in a while because even though I like it and I put a lot of work into it and I'm proud of it, there was a lot of things that I didn't know back then that I do now, and it will be changed in the future, definitely. Um, but apart from that, yeah, mostly just on Instagram. Follow me. I'd be happy if anyone wants to send me questions, please do. Direct messages are welcome, comments are welcome. Even do more collabs if you want. If anyone's out there and they wanna talk to me, or they've got any sort of you know recipe or content ideas, and they want to bounce off to someone, I'm happy to be involved in that. The more people I think we have collaborating in this space, the better, because it just means that it's just going to reach more and more people, and we're going to have so much, so much wider impact in
hmm.
society as a whole, and that's what we need. So yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, cheers for explaining all that. That was good. Yeah, I'm gonna look at your website as well actually after this. I must admit his Instagram content is very valuable. He posts stories
Thank you.
throughout the day, a lot of his meals. You might think, oh, it's always the same meal, but you think he's almost trying to better himself every day, and just fine tuning things like that. How are you going to
Yeah.
do it? So
See that's just the final point on that. That's one thing. So it doesn't get boring, to be honest.
mm,
Some people think it does, but you learn to love it. So who can imagine waking up and having steak and eggs every day? It sounds like you're living like in luxury, and it is like living in luxury. So that's also what I want to say. That it doesn't get boring. So
yeah,
yeah,
brilliant. That's perfect. Anyway, thanks so much for your time, James. I appreciate that. Please do
likewise,
follow his
means a lot.
Instagram. No worries. Yeah, cheers. Anyway, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate that. Cheers.